My name is Aaron Arends. I'm a senior regional analyst for the Americas at Intelligent Fusion, and today I will be talking about how cocaine from Latin America is corrupting Europe's ports. Europol has concluded that the epicenter of the drug trade in Europe has shifted from south to north, so from Spain, Portugal, Italy, towards Rotterdam, Antwerp, and to a lesser extent the Hamburg port. Why this shift has occurred is first of all because these ports are so huge and the volume of shipping containers is much larger that it's hard to police. The second reason for this is that it's basically the kingpin strategy in Latin America, who has led to larger criminal organizations fragmenting into smaller ones. One example of this is the United Self-Defense Forces in Colombia, who were demobilized in 2006. They were allied with the Italian mafia, the 'Ndrangheta, and that Italian mafia group used to have sort of a monopoly on cocaine in Europe. But once that group in Colombia was demobilized and fragmented into smaller criminal groups that are now known as the Clan del Golfo, in that process a lot of new alliances were forged, and the Italian mafia lost their dominant position in Europe, and now it's also become more fragmented. Apparently the Albanian organized crime groups have a really strong position, but it's hard to tell who's really in control because of this fragmentation. So in 2021, port authorities in Rotterdam, they broke their 2020 record of drug seizures, cocaine seizures. They seized over 70 tons of cocaine throughout the year of 2021. And nowadays, seizures of over a ton have become routine, whereas back in the days, 100 kilos was a large seizure. That's nothing compared to what it is today. These seizures don't tell you much about the amount of cocaine that's coming in, but it's estimated that Europe has around 4.4 million cocaine users, at least last year. And it's supposed to be a growing market. So Europe is a very attractive market for a drug trafficker. The routes into the US have been well established, but Europe is a growing market. The price for cocaine in Europe is much higher than in the US. And imagine if you're a Colombian trafficker, you don't have to go via the Mexicans or the Central Americans to get your drugs across. You can just go directly to Europe. There's higher prices, there's less a chance of interdiction, your drugs being seized, and there's less chance of you being extradited. So, from a South American perspective, Europe is a great place to sell your drugs. So the ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp are ideal, like I said before, because they are so big. They're hard to police with the budgets that are available. And the volume of containers is higher than any other port in Europe. So the people who take the drugs out of the containers in Antwerp and Rotterdam are called the uithalers, which means unloaders. So these unloaders, they break into the port and they get into the containers, take out the drugs, and take the drugs to a stash house, or maybe they sometimes put it in another container that's already been cleared by customs. So when an unloader gets caught, how long do you think, for example, that they go to prison for? It's actually in most cases it's 0. If you get caught with cocaine, actually holding it in your hands, then it's a different story. But most guys get caught just breaking into the port, and they get away with a €95 fine. So for your reference, that's about 80 pounds. And last year there were 400 arrests in the Port of Rotterdam of these trespassers, these unloaders. And there were only 200 suspects, so most of them returned to do it again. One guy even got caught 9 times last year, so 9 times he entered the port to take out cocaine from shipping containers without real consequences. So if you're an unloader that takes out the cocaine from the shipping containers, it's a great job for you because you have high profits, you have a very low chance of getting caught in the first place, and if you do get caught, the sentences are really minor. I don't want to advertise this occupation because once you get into the system, it's very hard to get out. And also, there are dangers associated with it because some guys, they go into the port via shipping containers themselves, so they hide into shipping containers, and then once they're inside, they break out and they find the right container where their cocaine is located. But in some cases, these guys were trapped and ran out of air, so it's not without dangers. But it's much better than robbing stores in Antwerp, for example, and that's what the police have been noticing in Antwerp. There's been a huge drop in robberies because everybody just wants to become an unloader these days. There's no point in running the risk of carrying out a robbery if you can be one of those unloaders. So why should businesses care about this that operate in the ports? Well, one new development is that these minor sentences has increased the amount of arrests significantly in the ports, but they keep coming back, these guys. So both Belgium and the Netherlands are considering to raise the maximum sentence for trespassers in the ports. The Netherlands is currently considering 2 years prison sentence, which actually scares a lot of businesses who operate in the ports because they fear that these unloaders that have been unarmed, usually, will now come armed and form a greater threat to their workers and to police. So they fear that violence will escalate because of this, and there are similar parallels in Latin America where these ports have been fought over, so that's their fear. So the second threat businesses face is related to corruption. So these unloaders have to work together with other parts in a chain network, and one of the most crucial parts is having someone who's corrupt inside the port. So these corrupt port officials, they can tell them exactly where the right container is with the cocaine. They might mark a container as checked by customs, or they might turn away a CCTV camera, for example. So these guys are crucial to have, and one example of this in Belgium is, for example, a cyber threat analyst who worked for the port authorities. He was advising police and people in the port to how to shield themselves from cybercrime, and he built in backdoors in their computers that gave a criminal organization the power to see everything that happened inside that business. Second example of this was in the Netherlands in 2019 in a village called Hedel. There was a fruit company, and that fruit company was, they found 400 kilograms of cocaine that wasn't intercepted, but they didn't know how it ended up there. And the traffickers then contacted the owner of this fruit company, texted him, you owe us 1.2 million euros. And if you don't pay up, then we start assassinating your workers one by one at random. So these workers for this fruit company started, finding grenades outside their house, eventually shootings, targeting their homes. Some cases there were firework bombs thrown into the homes of these employees, and the whole house burned down. So these employees had to move their whole family across the country to, make sure they're safe. And it's not really known if the owner of this fruit company knew about the shipment of drugs, if he was involved in some way. But it is clear that a lot of innocent people got caught up in the violence. So this example fits into a larger pattern of organized crime, growing in Europe. So in Spain, the number of drug gangs has multiplied. In Sweden, the number of shootings is increasing, and 8 out of 10 shootings is believed to be related to drug gangs. An Italian organized crime boss was assassinated in Germany. Criminal groups from the Balkans are assassinating people in the Netherlands. So there's a larger pattern, and not only is the amount of violence increasing, but also the intensity level. So it appears that criminals are more willing to use lethal violence. You can see this in the type of weapons that are seized. So it's more often assault rifles than before. And with that comes, 17-year-old kids shooting an AK-47 in a street. It goes everywhere. So more civilian casualties. We've seen public displays of violence. So there was a severed head found outside of a shisha bar in Amsterdam. Recently also they caught organized drug gang. They had shipping containers rigged as torture chambers. So these are examples that we didn't get back in the day, and it reminds me of things we see in Latin America. So that pattern is appearing here as well. One example of this is a Dutch-Moroccan organized crime group known as the Taki organization, or Dutch media call them also the Mokro Mafia. One of their hitmen flipped and now is an important informant for the police. And his brother was assassinated, also in Amsterdam, then his lawyer. Then once his lawyer was assassinated, it was like, okay, who's gonna be the next lawyer, or who's gonna fill in the void? And a public figure in Holland, celebrity is always on TV. It's a crime reporter, Peter R. de Vries. He said, okay, I'm gonna help this, suspect defend himself. And then Peter R. de Vries was also shot dead in Amsterdam recently in broad daylight in a public street with bars and cafes all around. So I don't think this is necessarily a tactical execution or anything. It's more a message like, okay, we can get anyone we want. You have to be afraid of us, whoever you are. So besides the society-wide implications that should concern everyone, businesses should be aware that the increase in violence might affect their supply chains, and also second-hand association. Maybe, like the fruit company, your brand name is affiliated with a drug seizure, and then things escalate from there. So not only in the sourcing of the supply chain, maybe in Latin America, it's important to look at the whole supply chain, and Europe is becoming a more risky place to do business in that sense.